And we have a time now for questions. And if you are on Zoom, please write the questions in the chat box. And we see some comments have already come in thanking Dr. Russell for his clear teaching about servant leadership and excellent medical illustrations. Does anyone here in the venue have a question? And we can provide a microphone for you here. And Dr. Russell, I have a question to get things started. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we should send you to Washington and Ottawa to teach this to our legislatures, from our communities to the top. They all need to hear this information. And it was very interesting. Mariana and I were flying to Saskatoon, and we got stuck in Toronto for 2-hour delay. And we met this couple sitting at the restaurant right next to us. And they were just saying, well, I don't know. I'm 30 some years old. Where am I going? How can I get out of the mess that I'm in? So I asked him, where do you have hope? And so it was very interesting conversation, but I don't care what country you live in, we all are living in times where everybody thinks we're doing what's right in our own eyes. We do have a question come in from Zoom. How would you relate this to the secular world? Do you not have, to people who do not have God in their lives?
And that's a really good question, because obviously if you approach somebody just off the bat with, well, your purpose in life is to love and serve God, they'll just pretty much blow you off. They'll just say, you don't have a clue. You're done, really, if that is the way, if that's your approach. And so I strongly believe that it comes down to, is God sovereign or isn't he? Because he can't be sort of sovereign. You either believe that God's sovereign or that he's not sovereign. And if God's sovereign, then he can work through any circumstance, and he brings these people across your life. I have had a lot of success. I work in a public university, and so I'm not allowed to speak anything about the gospel or anything along those lines, and to students, and to talk about that stuff in class or anything along those lines. Certainly not to colleagues. You can't be seen to be a proselytizer, I guess is what they would call it, which is completely opposite of the way I was when I was at Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi. When I taught there on the faculty, there I had a contractual requirement to explain the gospel and how it related to my faith, or how it related to my work, rather, my topic. So what you have to do, I do small things like, so I have this phrase that I often sign at the end of an email that says, continue to press on. Well, continue to press on, 4 words. That, to someone that's a believer, would probably connect that pretty quickly to what Paul said, right? The Apostle Paul said, haven't arrived yet, but this one thing I do, I continue to press on toward the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. But I'll send that to my colleagues. Like if I know they're having a hard time, or even if they're not having a hard time, if I just, all of us are having a hard time to some level, right? But I'll send that to them. And as I'm sending it, I am sending a piece of God's word into somebody's life. And I'm sending, and I'll even pray when that email, I hit send on it. It's like, Lord, bless them. Let those words be something to them. And it's just one of those things that I believe is part of God working on this earth. What do we pray in the Lord's Prayer? That God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. So may God's will be done on earth at Ohio University in my email system as it is in heaven. Right? You can extend that prayer. I believe God would bless that particular prayer said that way. And so I'll find these little pieces of Bible um, verse to use, right? There are things I'll even teach some of the medical metaphors in a class, like when I'm teaching about various topics. I've taught about like literally every semester teach the building on solid rock versus building on sand. I teach that. I never say it's from the Bible, but I always teach that because it relates to having a firm foundation in your body, in your core musculature. And so I teach that literally every semester to whoever's in the classroom, right? And so there's everything from atheists to really strong believers. And so I will always find ways to weave in these pieces of information from God's word. And they're kind of unsuspecting recipients, right? But that's kind of how God works. And, it's just sometimes I'll just smile and just kind of have a good crack up because God works in such mysterious ways. And so that's how I've done it. And that's, there are probably a lot of other people with a lot more creative ways to do it, but that's how I've done it. I mean, I'm trying to be a blessing to other people. And I've told my students, Christian and non-Christian alike, I said, you want to get ahead in this world, you want your life to improve, you work on being a blessing to other people.
Thank you.
And the word blessing is a word that still is relatively accepted without anybody saying, right, can't say that, can't say that. So that's another word that I've used many times, many times.
Thank you for that answer. If Christine is still on Zoom, he sent a message about being salt and light. And if he's on the call, please, if he could put the link to that. But basically, in summary, of that message, it doesn't take many people to transform a society. It only takes about 5%. So if you feel like you're in the minority, that's good. You just need a few more to transform your university, your hospital, your clinic by being salt and light. It's not about doing, it's about being. We have another question. Did you have another comment, Jeff?
Well, I was just going to say, so you can also think about the concept of darkness and light, right? So we get concerned about, well, I work at a secular university. Well, you don't really work at a secular university, right? Because you're there, or you work at a secular hospital, or you work at a secular clinic. Well, it can't be completely secular if you're there, because you're light. And if you think about light, darkness can never overcome light, right? When you have a light switch and you turn on the light, there's not a dark switch. You don't turn on darkness, right? I mean, obviously, the way the world turns around, the sun goes down every day, right? It gets dark. But if you think about darkness, darkness cannot overtake light. Only light can overtake darkness. If you're in a completely dark environment, you can see the smallest bit of light. But if you're in a completely light environment, you cannot see any amount of darkness at all unless it gets to be completely dark. Do you see what I mean? So just remember that dark and light is a good example of that. You're being a light in a dark place, and it can be discouraging, but that's why we need to have conferences like this, and that's why we need to have gatherings to come together and to encourage one another.
We have another question. Most of the young people this person works with are colleagues. How do you develop relationships? They don't have lunch together. They don't want to come over for dinner. They don't want to go to church events.
Well, first of all, it's not a fast process. It's easier for me because I have students and I develop a relationship in a semester with students, right? And then once I find out, like these students that I showed in the talk, right, I've known some of them many years. Like one of them is a Pilates instructor, and she was one of my dance students at the University of California, Irvine, many years ago. That was where I was before I was at Ohio. And so these folks I've known for a long time, and so that seems to be very easy and perhaps very enviable to have that kind of relationship. But I'll tell you, it was the same thing that you've described at the beginning. I had to figure out a way that I was going to develop their trust and develop that relationship. So now what I'll do is, for example, by email. So I mentioned the continue to press on, right? Well, I also express a lot of encouragement by email, and I'll often sign my emails, appreciate you, or appreciate your good work. Thank you for thank you for doing your work so well. Thank you for the thank you for what you represent. So I'll find, and this works really well for people that are non-believers, because who doesn't like to be praised? And so I'll find something to praise them with. And I mean, I spend a lot of time on email, way more time than I wish I had to, but that's just the way it is these days, and it's particularly at a university. And I never ignore emails from students. I might ignore them from some other people, not ever from students. And so with these and not from young professionals either, because I have a lot of young professionals writing to me. But I think it's something that has to be done over time. You've got to be in it for the long haul. And if you go a few weeks of trying to encourage somebody and lift them up, and you say, well, they're not responding, so right, you give up. I think you give up too soon. And it's one of those things. I mean, basically, there's two ways to get to the top of an oak tree. Right? You can sit on an acorn and wait, or you can climb. Right? So sitting on an acorn and waiting takes an awful long time, but it's not productive at all. So if you want to get to the top of that oak tree where the relationships are, you're going to have to climb. And climbing takes way more effort than sitting does. But it still takes a good long while, and it's also, it gets, the higher you go, the scarier it gets, right? Because especially if you're afraid of heights. So that's how I would do it. You've got to be in for the long haul. You've got to work. You've got to encourage them when you see them in person, encourage them by email, encourage them with every opportunity you have, and encourage them, be genuine about it. Don't just blow smoke at people, right? I mean, they can sniff that out a mile away. You've got to be genuine in what you're saying and find something really to praise them about. And then let gratitude start opening doors, because eventually they're going to say, man, everybody else is so negative and you're pretty positive all the time. What's going on? And I've had those conversations with colleagues of mine. I've had a number of people that I've led to the Lord over Zoom just because God worked out the details, and it's just very cool. So I ended up sending them a Bible, I'll get on. Matter of fact, I have a colleague in Australia, and I just had a conversation with her, and she's from a Buddhist background, and she and I were having a chat, and it just, God opened up the door. Told her about, she said, man, I really would like a Bible. Never had one. Could you send me a Bible? I sent her a Bible. I got on Amazon Australia and fired a Bible over to her, and she was very grateful. So, there's not a formula, but it takes time. So
now, our speaker yesterday, James McMillan, who's a palliative care person, he said when he goes through the airport or at a mall or some busy place, sometimes he just walks down, and as all the people are coming towards them, he says, you're made in the image of God. You're made in the image of God. You're made in the image of God. And that just changes his focus on how to treat people. And sometimes all you can do is just smile at somebody. And that's the only encouragement you can give. But here's another question. It's a two-parter. The first is, are leaders born or are they developed? And the second is, part B is, if you discover you're a disarticulated leader, how do you become articulated?
No, that's really good. Really good. Well, I got some thinking folks here. You're putting me on the spot. So, first of all, leaders, there are certain people that are born with a natural ability to take on leadership. Like that does not, I have some of that, right? I'm the first of four children, right? So typically it's an older, the firstborn is usually the one, or not exclusively, but that's typical. My dad was in the United States Marine Corps, and so there's that leadership because he was a really good leader and was promoted many times for that. My mom was a leader in the community. Right, so I had it. I saw what it meant to be a leader. So I was born with these natural abilities, but then I watched it in my family and not in any kind of a Christian context at all, but I just saw people leading, doing things, right? But then there comes a time where you have to decide, if you're a believer, you have to decide that you're going to lead for the Lord instead of for yourself. And so you have to develop your your skills, as I mentioned, right? Your ability, that whole package of ability, and you have to develop your character. But then you have to take the what God gives you and use it, and you have to be really purposeful. So to me, the answer to the first question, not can be born, but has to be developed, right? Everybody has to develop. Some people have to develop more than others, just depending on their natural tendencies and how they were born and the way God, you know, whatever environment God put them into in their life. But once you become a believer, if you think about this model I have, so God has a purpose. So how do you become not a disarticulated leader and instead be an articulated one? You decide, all right, here's my purpose. My purpose is to love and serve God. And that is why I'm here. And that changes your whole environment. We're going to talk this afternoon. I'm going to set some people up on their ears this afternoon because I'm going to dismantle the world's teaching on purpose. And I'm going to talk about the word's teaching on purpose instead of the world's teaching on purpose. And if you think of your purpose as to love and serve God, then the next piece of this is to love and serve your neighbor. So it's everybody that you're around that you're leading, whether you're an official leader and whether they say you're the director of nursing or you're the chief of staff or you're whatever, who cares about the title? You can still be a leader if you're around people. So the only people that can't be leaders are people that are not around people. So if you're not around people, just forget it, right? Everybody else should be everybody, right? Everybody's around people all the time. So everybody, let's think about love and serve your neighbor. So how do you do that? Well, you look at the people around you. Those are your neighbors. It's not the person that lives in the house next to you. It's everybody that you're around, everybody that you interface in every day. So you've got to figure out how you're going to love them and serve them. And by the way, you might not love them first. You might have to serve them first and then you love them, right? Because some people aren't too lovable. But if you serve them, you say, you know what, this person's not so bad after all. I think I can get on with them a little bit. And then you have complete control over your character. You can't blame God if you got bad character. So you can be working on your character. And then what are the abilities that I need to be able to love and serve my neighbor in this particular calling that God's given me, this vision that He's given me, right? He's like, what do I do? Well, how about take a class in interpersonal relationships, right? If that's a struggle for you, or take a take a seminar on mental health, right? And maybe you can. There's a lot of people that need some mental health care. Take a class in mental health first aid, right? My wife's an instructor here in the States of mental health first aid. Right, she goes all over the place teaching mental health first aid. So teach a class or to take a class in mental health first aid, get certified in that, and then you're better able to manage some of the things that people are going through, and you can actually be a real service to those people. So you have to find ways to serve. And slowly but surely, all those pieces start coming up off the floor and they start coming together in the model. And because you're making a purposeful effort to bring those pieces together. You're on your knees saying, Lord, I want to be an articulated servant leader. I want to make a difference in my world. I want to bring a piece of heaven down to earth. I want for my world to be as it is in heaven. I want it to be that way. Lord, would you make it so and use me? Right? You can't be, I call it a half an Isaiah. You cannot be a half an Isaiah. Well, half an Isaiah says, here I am. All right. What's the full Isaiah say? Here I am, send me. All right. Not just here I am. God already knows where you are. Right. He knew where as Isaiah was. Isaiah completed the thought and said, send me. I'm the one. Call on me. I got my hand up. Send me. So hopefully that's helpful to the one that asked that.
Thank you. So any other questions? Yes. You here?
Hello. Yes, it's working. Thank you, Dr. Russell. That was a powerful presentation, and I must confess that I was quite touched and motivated. Let me ask one question. You know, bearing in mind our Christian stand and principles, will you encourage Christian healthcare workers to take on leadership position within the healthcare sector in order to also be able to transform it?
That's a really good question, because I got to say, in my work in academia, I've told my wife, look, if I ever start talking about wanting to be a dean or like a department chair or anything like, just take me out back and shoot me, because I do not want to be like that, because I see how those people are. And I see the amount of, I mean, first of all, it quadruples your email load, right? Which I already don't have enough time to do emails. And, you know, but there's so many things about those people, the what I call bureaucrats, right? Like, I don't want to be like that. And I don't, and if God called me, I would willingly go. He hadn't called me that way yet, but if I called, he would willingly go. And so the answer to the question, I believe, is if God calls you to do that, if that's a new vision that he gives you, you better go. Right? What if David said, "No, God, I don't really want to lead Israel. I'm good with the sheep, right? The sheep, they do what I tell them to do. They don't talk back. They don't give me any trouble. I just got to walk around all day with the sheep. No big deal. Thanks, but no thanks," right? What if David had said that? Well, we'd probably have different history, wouldn't we? And so David said, David was definitely not half an Isaiah, right? He said, "Here am I, send me," right? So he completed the Isaiah thought. And so so I think that you should do the same. I will say this about being higher up the ladder: you have a greater amount of influence and a greater opportunity to specify the way the organization moves forward. And so I think it's really powerful when God's people can be in those higher positions. You have to be called, though. If you're not called, if you're just taking it because your boss says, "Yeah, I want you to do this," then to me, you're making a big mistake. You need to really have a calling, because it's too easy to get into that kind of an environment and get really messed up, because those environments, they can be really unseemly and distasteful, the way a lot of the upper echelons of organizations work, or the government, or any other group, right? I mean, it's tough. So hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, I would love to see that, and I think it's going to help accelerate transformation. But don't do it unless you're called to do it, because we want the ones that are called, right? We want the Davids, right? Maybe not the Sauls. We want the Davids. So.
Thank you.